Hey everybody, thanks for checking into today's video. On the screen right now, I've got kind of a play-by-play of what this video is going to be doing. In just a little bit, I'll review the last video about introducing and adding quotes. I've got some new material in just a minute. It's all about defining and explaining quotes and how that relates to the rhetorical triangle. We'll also be talking about how that relates to claim data warrant. I think and I hope that this is going to make this research inquiry revision a little bit more accessible to all of us. I'm going to have some explaining quotes sentence starters that you'll be more than welcome to use. I would encourage it. After that, I'll be looking at my own example research paper about tattoos, and I'll be defining my own quotes and explaining my own quotes as well. Now, just like I talked about in the inquiry revision, introducing and adding quotes video, I need you to be looking at this part. At the very least, you have to watch this part of the video. If you feel comfortable about defining quotes and explaining quotes, you don't have to look at my examples if you don't need to. But a lot of us need extra practice defining our quotes, and a lot of us need extra practice explaining our quotes. This is where a lot of us lost points on the rubric. Let's jump into it. In the last video I made, Inquiry Revision, Introducing and Adding Quotes, I talked about how we needed to build ethos, that ethic, that trust, by introducing quotes. Who gave you that quote? Where is it from? Again, is your quote from somebody really famous, a NASA scientist, or is it from the side of a dumpster? Introducing quotes builds that trust, and then all you needed to do for the adding quotes was type the quote or summarize that quote in your own words. Here's the new material. When it comes to defining a quote, looking at academic terms and explaining them in a way that your audience can understand, or explaining the meaning of a quote, the thing that you're really doing is that you're building logos. Again, logos just means logic, because what you are doing is you're showing your understanding of the topic. So you've already built a little bit of ethos by introducing your quote. And when you use logos to explain the logic, hey, this is what it means. Hey, this is why it's important. You end up also building or proving your, I'm going to put that in italics, ethos. And here's what I mean by that. If you know what you're talking about, your audience will trust you. So if you use logos, if you use logic to explain how you understand the quote and how the quote relates to your topic, it builds and proves your ethos. Your audience will trust you. Your audience will think that you're credible. And that's really what we are looking for today. When it comes to writing these body paragraphs, you can think about it similar, but not directly the same as a claim data warrant. And that's why I have this little squiggly line. It means about the same or close to. In these body paragraphs, your claim is just like the topic sentence. The data, I'm actually going to make that exactly the same, is the quote or the summary of the quote in your own words. And the warrant is very similar too, because again, that is your explanation. It is your creative thinking. It is your logical understanding of this issue. And that's what's building up our ethos. So if that helps, think about all of these body paragraphs as the claim data warrant, as the topic, as the quote, and as the explanation. Very similar to when we've done warrants, there are a lot of sentence starters that you can always use for this explanation of a quote. You can say something like, this is important because, not importance. important because this shows that, this means that, and that's all I'm going to put for right now, because you can modify each of these sentence starters a little bit to really mean the same thing. This is important because, this is essential because, this shows that, this demonstrates that. What you're doing again is you're explaining your creative thinking, your logical understanding. Why does this quote matter? Why did you include it in your essay? Why should your audience care? At this point, I'm going to take a look at my example research paper. First, I'm going to look at all of the quotes that I have in sequence, and I'm going to see if I need to define any academic terms. Then I'll go through each one by one, and I'll explain why is it important to the topic. All right, let's see. I've got my research here. This is still just my outline. I haven't even touched my introduction paragraph yet. I'm going to wait till I have all of my body paragraphs figured out. I've got my topic in this kind of orangey color. I've got my quote introduction from Lars Krutak in this light orange. I've got my summary, because again, I took this quote from Gambino and I put it into my own words. I have that in yellow. My in-text citation from Gambino is in green. Now let's look at defining the complex terms if needed. Otzi is a 5,300-year-old mummified human that is referred to as Iceman because he was discovered in the Ostal Alps on the Italy-Austria border in September 1991. My first thought is that I might have to identify Ostal Alps, but luckily, Ostal Alps is already defined for me as being on the Italy-Austria border, so I don't really think I need this, so I am just going to go ahead and get rid of it. If you don't have to define anything in your quote, don't worry about it, just skip that part. Let's look at the next quote. The 61 tattoos on Otzi's body consist mostly of groups of lines or crosses and are spread across his body. A part of me was thinking about the need to define cross in terms of Christianity, but since he's this old, he's older than the crucifixion event, so I don't think I need to define, I don't think there are any complex terms, so I'm just going to get rid of that point in my outline. Let's look at the next quote. Researchers in the most recent study used a multispectral imaging technique that detected color differences on the skin, even in the non-visible range. Okay, now I have some complex terms. I do not know what multispectral imaging is. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to open up a new tab up here. I'm going to paste that term in here and see what I can get. All right, multispectral imaging means methods of spectral imaging where one obtains images corresponding to at least a couple of spectral channels, sometimes more than 10. The used spectral regions are often at least partially outside the visible spectral range, covering parts of the infrared and ultraviolet region. What the heck? That is like just as confusing. I think this part is something that I can use. I can try to summarize it in my own terms. In that, there's the colors that we can see, we can see pink and green and blue and red and purple, but there's like different waves of light. That's what this spectral means, like the spectrum of light. And there's infrared that we can't see, and then there's ultraviolet that we can't see as well. So I need to somehow define that multispectral imaging is a technique that lets people see things in the infrared or ultraviolet. I think that's what I'm going to add in here. So multispectral imaging means that researchers could use infrared and ultraviolet light spectrums to see and discover the tattoos. So I've taken this complex term, I Googled it, I found a definition, I took that definition and I phrased it into my own words, and now I have my defined complex term. Multispectral imaging means that researchers could use infrared and ultraviolet light spectrums to see and discover that tattoos. I'm defining multispectral as using infrared and ultraviolet light spectrums. Boom, I have that defined complex term. Let's move on. Let's look. Incredibly, approximately 80% of these tattoos overlap with classical Chinese acupuncture points utilized to treat rheumatism, a medical condition that plagued the Iceman. I think I need to define acupuncture, and I also need to define rheumatism. Now, I know what acupuncture is. Acupuncture is the method of using needles to trigger stress points in the body to be helpful. So acupuncture is the method of using needles to puncture stress areas of the body to promote healing. This process, and I'm going to now talk about rheumatism, which is a type of arthritis. So this process can be used. Well, I don't want to necessarily say this process can be used because that's the same as that. Utilized, used, it means the same thing. So I might just have a new sentence. Rheumatism is a type of arthritis and it can be cured or can be helped with acupuncture. Wow, I can't spell anything today. So I've defined acupuncture, I've defined rheumatism. So now every single person that reads my essay will understand this quote because of the reference to acupuncture and because of the reference to rheumatism. Let's look at my next quote. The new study draws on this existing body of knowledge to argue that Otzi's tattoos required considerable effort and, irrespective of the efficacy of the treatment, provided care for the Iceman. Irrespective of the efficacy. Irrespective means like not paying attention to, like not heeding. It's like ignoring. And efficacy means like how well it works, its effect. So I think I do need to define irrespective of the efficacy. And I think what I'm going to say is that, how can I explain irrespective of the efficacy? I might just, maybe I'll put it in italics. Is an important term. That means that, again, it's that they ignored how well it worked. So it means that these tattoos didn't have the medical effect that was desired. I think that's good because again, it's they provided care even if it didn't work. They were trying something. So now I've got my complex terms all defined. So now what I need to start looking at is now I need to start using these sentence starters. This is important because this shows that, and this means that, to start explaining these quotes and these sentence starters. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to scroll down to find my first quote, and I'm going to explain why I personally think that it is important. Here we go. Otzi is a 5,300-year-old mummified human that is referred to as Iceman because he was discovered on the Oztal Alps on the Italy-Austria border in September 1991. So on this number 2 slot, I need to explain the importance of this information. And I'm going to use the sentence starter. This is important because, and the important thing to me is how old he is. 5,300 years old goes back to the Copper Age. And that's something that I found in one of my other articles. I was going to look at it, but I don't really need to. So this is my important part. This is why I included this quote. This is important because it shows that tattoos were a practice that dates all the way back to the Copper Age of ancient humans. And that's it. It's obvious, right? This is important because he's old, but I need to explain it. I need to show my understanding, including this little titch of information that it's from the Copper Age. Now I'm showing that you can trust me because I'm showing you that I know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's do the same with this next tattoo. The next quote. The 61 tattoos on Otzi's body consist mostly of groups of lines or crosses that are spread across his body. So the important thing to me is that there's 61 of them. That's pretty cool. And that they are lines or crosses. And I think I'm really going to focus on this lines or crosses bit. So let's use one of the sentence starters. This is important because, and again, I need to show why is it important that it's lines or crosses. To me, lines and crosses mean that it was done intentionally, like on purpose. And it wasn't just like some weird scar that this guy got from like a saber-toothed tiger or something. So that's what I need to explain here. This is important because the evidence of the patterns, that's me referring to the lines and the crosses, the patterns, shows that these tattoos were, and I'm gonna try to sound extra fancy here. In fact, this is a really good thing to use. In fact makes you sound like you really know what you're talking about. It shows that these tattoos were, in fact, intentional. Again, that just means that it was planned and not just some freak accident. So I took this little blurb about lines and crosses, and I'm showing how that proves that these tattoos were intentional. That's the whole point of my explanation. They were intentional. They were done on purpose. Next quote. Researchers in the most recent study used a multispectral imaging technique that detected color differences on the skin, even in the non-visible range. Before I even think about it too much, I'm just going to put my sentence, starter. This is important because, now I think what's unique about this quote is that it shows that even though they're hard to see and they have to use infrared or ultraviolet, these tattoos have still stuck around. Like they're still there. They didn't just fall out. So that's what I'm going to explain is my personal logic that you can use this technology to see these tattoos, which proves that they were done well, that they were done with a good technique. Let's see how I could phrase this. This is important because it proves that, let's see, I'm going to add that age in here, despite 5,300 years of decay, the methods used to tattoo Otzi were effective, right? I think I'm going to add these Copper Age methods worked well enough. Tattoos and I think I'm going to keep it like that. Oh, I might add something about the ultraviolet. So they last thousands of years, even if advanced technology must be used to see them. Because that really relates it back. So I'm taking that you can see these tattoos with infrared and ultraviolet, and that proves that these methods were effective because the tattoos are still there. Next quote. Incredibly, approximately 80% of these tattoos overlap with classical Chinese acupuncture points utilized to treat rheumatism, a medical condition that plagued the Iceman. And I have my defined complex term here in kind of like that darker green. So I'm going to start with a sentence starter. Well, gosh, I have to think about this because this kind of makes it seem that Otzi's culture knew about classical Chinese acupuncture, but that's not true. They hadn't crossed paths. So I think I'm going to start by explaining that, like, hey, Otzi didn't know Chinese culture. So I'm gonna sound fancy. The correlation, and that's like the connection essentially. Acupuncture does, I'm gonna say does not. Otzi's culture had interactions with Asian or Chinese cultures. What it does mean, and that's essentially, this means that. It's almost the same sentence starter. Like I said, you can modify them as you want. So what it does mean, or what this means that, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. What it does mean is that Otzi's culture, if they knew acupuncture, that means they knew health, so had their own understanding of the human body, methods to improve health. Yeah, I think that works. And our culture doesn't ever think about tattoos as healing, so I'm gonna say, interestingly enough, they used tattoos as that method to heal. Because with this longer explanation, I'm showing that Otzi's culture didn't learn Chinese acupuncture, but instead, and this is why it's so incredible, is that this culture from these Alps had their own understanding. They had developed their own system of healing through tattoos. And I think that is pretty interesting or incredible. Last quote, here we go. The new study draws on this existing body of knowledge to argue that Otzi's tattoos required considerable effort and, irrespective of the efficacy of the treatment, provided care for the Iceman. I had defined that irrespective of the efficacy shows that it means that the tattoos didn't have the medical effect that was desired. So I'm going to use a different sentence starter. I'm going to say the necessary takeaway from this is that I'm going to say the medicinal practices, and that just means like the way that they healed people. The medicinal practice of using tattoos may have been flawed or not worked But it does prove that, whoa, I had that twice. It does prove that Otzi's culture was one that showed compassion and care for their own. So all I'm saying is maybe the important thing about Otzi's tattoos isn't that they actually cured his rheumatism. Maybe the most important thing about Otzi's tattoos is it showed that his culture cared. Because when we look at tattoos in our culture today, we don't think necessarily that getting a tattoo means that you care about somebody, or that tattooing means that you care. But this is a really interesting perspective. And folks, that's how I'm going to expect you to explain your own quotes. So here's your next step. Look at your own papers and define, explain the quotes, and that's it. Use as much time as you need. Revisions are due April 30th, and you can earn 100% points back. That's all I've got for you today. I really appreciate you listening. Have an awesome day and enjoy this nice weather. Bye, folks.